Was life a relentless cycle of dirt, debt, and despair for the medieval peasant? Did a single, aching back define their entire existence, forever bound to the whims of a lord and the vagaries of the weather? It wasn't a glorious tapestry of knights and castles, was it? It was something far grimmer, a brutal, everyday reality woven with threads of hunger, obligation, and a desperate struggle for survival. Let's peel back the layers of history and witness the life of Thomas, a villager in the damp, gray fields of Lincolnshire, circa 1380. Thomas wasn't born into privilege. His father, a weary man with hands like weathered oak, had inherited a meager strip of land, barely enough to feed a family, let alone provide for the future. The land itself was a patchwork of stubborn clay and thin, yielding soil, perpetually damp and prone to flooding. It wasn't a farm, not really. It was a holding, a precarious lease on a sliver of earth, and its fate was inextricably linked to the demands of Lord Beaumont, a man whose face was as cold and unyielding as the stone walls of his manor house. The day began before the sun dared to peek over the horizon. Thomas, no older than 14, would be roused by the insistent bleating of sheep and the rhythmic clang of his father's plow. The plow wasn't a gleaming, efficient machine. It was a crude wooden beast, reliant on brute strength and a constant supply of oxen, animals that were as much a financial burden as a source of labor. Each furrow was a testament to backbreaking toil, a slow, agonizing dance with the earth. His mother, Alara, already would be up, tending to the small kitchen hearth, coaxing a meager fire to life. Breakfast was never a feast. It was a hunk of coarse bread, perhaps a bit of cheese if they were lucky, and a watery broth, whatever could be scraped together from the garden and the dwindling stores. The Lord's demands were immediate and unforgiving. A portion of the harvest, a hefty tithe to the church, a merchant, a yearly payment for his daughter's marriage, and a fine for simply existing on the land. The fines were a constant source of anxiety. A misplaced tool, a broken fence post, a sheep that wandered onto Beaumont's land, each transgression carried a penalty, often payable in coin, which was increasingly scarce. Thomas remembered his grandfather's tale of a man fined for accidentally stepping on a lord's prized rosebush. The rosebush, of course, was more valuable than the man's entire harvest. The manorial court was a grim spectacle. The bailiff, a hulking figure with a permanent scowl, presided over proceedings, his voice a low rumble that echoed through the muddy field. Witnesses were summoned, accused, and often subjected to humiliating punishments. A lost cow meant a whipping, a late payment of rent meant a public shaming, and a dispute over land boundaries could escalate into a brawl, ending with someone bleeding and humiliated. Thomas had witnessed it all, the fear in his neighbor's eyes, the grim satisfaction on the bailiff's face. Then there was the winter. The harvest, if it was good, was a brief respite, a fleeting moment of abundance. But winter was a different beast entirely. The land froze, the crops withered, and the livestock weakened. Food became a precious commodity, traded for meager coins or bartered for essential goods. Thomas recalled the gnawing hunger of those lean years, the desperate measures taken to stave off starvation, eating roots and berries, supplementing their meager diet with whatever scraps they could find. The village itself was a collection of hovels, huddled together for warmth and protection. The houses were built of wattle and daub, a mixture of mud, straw, and sticks. They were dark, damp, and cramped, offering little respite from the elements. The stench of wood smoke, animal dung, and unwashed bodies hung heavy in the air. Thomas's family shared their dwelling with a family of pigs, a pragmatic arrangement that provided a small amount of bacon and lard, but also added to the ever-present smell. Life wasn't just about survival, it was about ceremony. Every event from births to deaths demanded a ritual, a payment, a display of piety. A baptism required a gift to the godparents, a piece of cloth, a loaf of bread, or a few coins. A wedding was a community affair, a celebration that stretched for days, marked by feasting, music, and dancing. But these celebrations were expensive, draining the family's already meager resources. Thomas remembered the elaborate procession for his cousin's wedding, the colorful banners, the overflowing tables of food, and the mournful strains of the fiddle. And then there were the funerals. the most expensive of all. The deceased had to be carried to the church on a bier, draped in cloth, accompanied by mourners who offered prayers and alms. A mortuary beast, a sheep or a pig, had to be presented to the church as a donation to help the soul on its journey to the afterlife. Thomas's own grandmother had died in winter, and the family had struggled for months to afford the funeral expenses. The Lord's influence extended beyond the fields and the courtroom. He controlled the forest, the common pasture, and the water sources. Thomas remembered being forbidden to gather firewood from the Lord's wood, a transgression that resulted in a fine. The Lord's authority was absolute, a constant reminder of the peasant's subservient position, but there was also a subtle, unspoken defiance. The peasants weren't passive victims. They found ways to resist, to carve out small pockets of autonomy. They cultivated their own gardens, supplementing their meager rations with vegetables and herbs. They brewed their own ale, a potent brew that offered a brief respite from the hardships of daily life. They engaged in trade with neighboring villages, exchanging goods and services. Thomas recalled his father's skill in repairing tools and crafting wooden toys, a way of earning a small income and preserving a sense of pride. The Black Death, which swept through England in the mid-14th century, brought a new level of devastation. Villages were decimated, families shattered, and the labor force drastically reduced. Thomas's own family had lost several relatives to the plague, a terrifying reminder of the fragility of life. The labor shortage, however, offered a glimmer of hope. Wages rose, and peasants were able to demand better terms from their lords. This, of course, led to resentment and conflict, culminating in the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. Thomas, a young man at the time, witnessed the fury of the rebels, their demands for an end to serfdom and a fairer distribution of wealth. The revolt was brutally suppressed, but it had sown the seeds of change. The lords, forced to concede some ground, gradually relaxed their demands, reducing rents and easing the burden of labor services. As Thomas grew older, he began to diversify his income. He learned to spin wool, producing yarn that he sold to the local weaver. He helped his neighbor with his harvest in exchange for a share of the proceeds. He even ventured into the forest, hunting rabbits and selling them at market. These supplemental activities provided a crucial buffer against hardship, allowing him to provide for his family with a little more security, but the specter of debt always loomed. A bad harvest, a sick animal, a sudden illness, any of these could plunge a family into financial ruin. Thomas remembered his father's constant worry about the impending winter, the fear of not having enough food to feed his family. He learned to be frugal, to conserve resources, to make every penny count. Thomas's life was a testament to resilience, to the ability of humans to endure even the most appalling conditions. It wasn't a life of luxury or ease, but it was a life of purpose, a life rooted in the land and bound by tradition. He never escaped the cycle of poverty and hardship, but he managed to carve out a small measure of dignity, to provide for his family, and to leave behind a legacy of hard work and determination. And now, centuries later, as we examine the fragments of their existence, do we truly grasp the magnitude of their struggle? Was their world defined solely by the relentless pursuit of sustenance, a bleak landscape of toil and deprivation? Or did they possess a spirit of community, a deep connection to the land, and a quiet dignity that transcends the limitations of their circumstances? The answer perhaps lies not in grand narratives of heroism or tragedy, but in the countless unsung stories of individuals like Thomas, who lived and died within the confines of a medieval world, their lives a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. Did they ever dream of a different life, a life beyond the fields and the Lord's demands?